Alright mate, how you doing? Men are becoming more feminine. And this isn't just some alpha bro speak. In the West, the testosterone levels of men have been declining pretty rapidly since the 1970s. Now, I know there are certain people in this society that will say this is a good thing. This is a sign of progress because, after all, don't you think that testosterone-fueled men have been the main problem in society for tens of thousands of years, which is a mindset I will get into soon. But the fact is, men who have low testosterone, that's a problem, not just on the individual level for the man, it's also a problem for those who he encounters, who's around him, and it's also a problem in society. Overall, men with lower testosterone are weaker. And I believe that a society with weak men is a society that is far more susceptible to collapse. If all the strong men in this society vanished, overnight, society, the infrastructure that we come to rely on, would collapse with it. Today, I'm talking about this mass feminization of men, the emasculation, so to speak, this spiritual even castration of modern man, and what might be causing it. For decades, the general sentiment in Western society has been that men are not needed, that masculinity is a joke at best, and toxic and predatory and dangerous at worst. On one end of the spectrum, you have men being portrayed in the media as bumbling, doddering, idiotic fools like Homer Simpson or Raymond in Everybody Loves Raymond. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have masculinity being seen as inherently toxic, inherently a problem, like the time where James Cameron famously said that testosterone was a toxin that you needed to remove from your system. Sweet Jesus. It's become far too common to hear things like men are problematic. Men are problematic. Men are rapists in waiting. Men are animals, pigs, tyrants, oppressors, when in reality, this is not men at all. It's an extremely low minority of it. For example, in the US, annually, only 0.2% of men are arrested for a violent crime. And at least in Sweden, only 1% of men are responsible for 63% of all violent crime. It really isn't all men. Most men are awesome. But even the historical narrative that underlies Western society now can be easily explained as tens of thousands of years of men oppressing women. But even questioning this will get you instantly labelled as a hateful misogynist and get you cancelled. And I know, because when I post this stuff on Facebook, I get this exact same response. But here's another statistic. 0.00059% of men are billionaires. That's a very small number of men. And if we look in history, the vast majority of men had no power with which to speak of. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, even if they did, here's something about those men. They're not alive anymore. We are not those men. The vast majority of men hate violence, especially against women. The vast majority of men in the street, if they saw a woman being assaulted or abused in some way, you'd have 5 or 6 men like defending the woman and attacking the attacker and making sure everyone was safe. But it just seems to be that in the media, this gets overlooked. Almost nowhere do you find positive, life-affirming, enhancing messages about masculinity. In the past, you had movies, you had superhero movies, you had movies with a strong male protagonist. And as we all know, if you've been paying attention to Hollywood over the past 10 years, Hollywood is doing a fantastic job of completely eroding any semblance of strong male characters.
How quaint.
And crowbarring some woman into it for some reason.
I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you.
And by the way, I'm not against strong female characters if there's a reason for it. For example, one of my favourite characters is Ellen Ripley from the Alien franchise. She's absolutely mind-blowing as a character.
Get away from her, you bitch!
But anyway, I digress. You never hear from society that the vast majority of men are good. Women aren't told this, men aren't told this. You don't hear that narrative very often, at least I didn't. You never hear that we need strong men. You never hear this. You hear the exact opposite. And it's this social narrative that actively discourages men, young men in particular, from manifesting their masculinity in a healthy way. that benefits everybody. And when you tell a boy that his masculinity is toxic and that he's the result of generations of tyrannical, predatory men, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think that boy is going to, how that boy is going to respond to that? He's going to see his masculinity as a toxin that needs to be removed from the human body, and he's going to repress it. And this does not look good. When you see a man with deeply repressed masculinity, that is not something that you want to be, and it's not something you want to be around. The structure of modern society does not enhance the masculinity and the strength, the healthy strength in men. If anything, the structure of modern society has completely failed men. We live in the age of the absent father. Many of us didn't grow up with a father. The majority of us didn't grow up with a healthy role model for a father. A father should be our first role model, but we didn't have one. We are sent to school to be in an environment that is almost completely dominated by women. The vast majority of teachers are women. The problem is that from this early age, we're receiving basic training in femininity. We're receiving basic training in how to please women, how to be a good boy for women. And one of the biggest impediments to a man's maturation, psychologically, spiritually, etc., one of the biggest things that gets in the way of his development is if he craves and forms his existence around the approval of women. And psycho-spiritually, this represents his attachment to the mother. So there are no positive male role models in society, almost ever. And when you struggle psychologically, what do? You go to a therapist. You're taught as a man that you should share your emotions more and you should go to a therapist. Well, the vast majority of therapists are women. Where are all the strong men? This society is not suffering because of toxic masculinity. This society is struggling from a lack of masculinity. Society used to introduce a boy to the challenging world of men around the age of 14 with a rite of passage, an initiation ritual that separated him from his mother and introduced him to the harsh chaos of nature, but also the power that lies within himself. In society, we don't have this anymore. More young men are living with their parents than at any other point, any other generation since records of this began. Surging house prices and this absolutely nuts economy has made it so that young men will find it extremely difficult to buy a house, and a man who cannot move out of his parents' house in a literal sense will never psychologically develop fully as a man. I've made a few videos about a syndrome called Peter Pan syndrome, and it's this feeling that you are a boy trapped in a man's body. I'm talking about this actual felt sense that you never really took off in life. And if you want to learn about that syndrome, then check this video out next, because this is probably my best video on it. Take care, mate, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.